We will have the secretary make a determination of quorum. I believe we have quorum. This time, we'll move on to approval of the minutes from our January 24th meeting. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes if there's no objections or corrections to be made.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Minutes shall be approved. At this time, we'll move on to the meat of the agenda today. We will welcome Nicholas Preservati, Director of the Office of Energy, also Director of the Public Energy Authority, to give us a presentation on a report on electrical self-generation by Appalachian Power and Wheeling Power.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Make sure I get the right buttons, I'm assuming. So before I go into this, I want to say very briefly an overview of what this is. And the presentation that I'm going to provide, the information that you're going to see in the PowerPoint presentation comes expressly from the PSC's orders. In this case, the report of its consultant, CTC, they issued a report that was relied upon by the PSC, and from AEP's corporate documents. So anything in this PowerPoint presentation comes from those three sources. It's not from the Office of Energy's conclusions. I will have some insights and conclusions at the end, and I'll identify those for you. But I just wanted to say that up front so everybody understands where the information is coming from. Very quickly, there's three plants here at issue that we're talking about. It's the Mitchell plant. You can see here some very quick information about it. Max burn rate of 15,000 tons per day, coal storage capacity of 1 million tons, and it has the capacity to have a 67-day supply of coal. Mountaineer, max burn rate of 12,000 tons per day, can store 1.8 million tons, and it has capacity to store a 150-day supply of coal. And then there's John Amos plant, significantly higher. It's got 3 units. Burn rate of 27,850 tons per day, 1.7 million capacity, 61-day supply. In regards to all three of the plants, CTC found that AEP is maintaining these plants consistent with the generally accepted industry practices. They found that all three plants are able to operate at a 70% capacity factor, that they're able to operate at that capacity through 2040. They also found that the coal procurement is handled by AEP Service Corporation out of Columbus, Ohio. It's not handled locally. And the coal is purchased on a fleet-wide basis. It's not purchased for the individual plants or for the individual units at the specific plants. Real quickly, why are we talking about EPA regulations? This is an important issue. EPA issued 2 regulations, the ELG and CCR. Without going into those in depth, what that means is the plants had to either upgrade to meet the requirements of those 2 statutes, or they have to agree to stop burning coal by 2028. APCO sought approval to retrofit their plants to meet those requirements. Signal they're going to operate through 2040. The PSC approved it, and the upgrades were then approved and given a rate increase to cover those. So at the heart of the case, we hear a lot of the talk about the 69% capacity factor and what that means. This is the order from the PSC that sets the 69% capacity factor, and I'll get into this later. One point I want to make now is it's not a requirement. There's a lot of talk, what is the 69% capacity factor? Is it a requirement? It's not a requirement, but it's also not a goal. There's a lot of talk about seeing it as a goal. It's more than a goal, it's an expectation. And the PSC actually used those words there. They expect the companies to generate at that capacity if it's economically viable, and that they're supposed to take reasonable steps to be able to operate at that capacity factor. If they take reasonable steps to operate that capacity factor and they can't, then that's understandable. So why are we here and what's the issue? The issue is that the AEP, APCO, and Willing Power sought a $552 million under recovery from the PSC, ultimately increasing rates to the ratepayers for a period of March 1, 2021 through February of 2023. And the reason for that under recovery is because they had to buy substantially more energy from PJM than self-generating. From the PSC reports and CTC, the basis for that, for them having to purchase from PJM instead of self-generating, it was the increased cost of coal made self-generation too expensive. So during this period, March 21st through February 23rd, during that period, PJM had the highest energy prices it had had in over 20 years. During that same period of time, the companies had the lowest generation from the 3 plants that they'd had in 20 years. That's why this issue is important. The capacity factor from September to December 2021 at the Mitchell plant dropped from 49% to 6%. John Amos plant dropped from 59% to 3%. Mountaineer plant dropped from 29% to 0%. It did not operate. Again, these are CTC and the PSC's findings. So what's that mean? Comparing the PJM to the self-generation increased costs. During that time period, self-generation increased from about 20 megawatts, $20 a megawatt hour to about 40. PJM prices increased from 30 megawatts to more than 90. At some point, for short periods at times, it went up into the hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for very short periods of time. What the PSC found was when the price differential at PJM was $10 higher than self-generation for AEP, AEP could make $6.4 million per week in savings that could be passed on to the ratepayers. When that price differential rose to $60, they could make $38 million per week by self-generating that could then be put off to the benefit of the ratepayers. If AEP was able to self-generate during that period, it would have not only alleviated the $552 million under recovery, it would allow them to incur $231 million in cost savings. Looking at that spread, that's a total spread of $784 million in total avoided costs and savings combined. So CTC in their report to the PSC found that part of the issue was coal procurement policies, and that the coal procurement is conducted fleet-wide and not tailored to the individual plants, that the contracts roll off of a rate of 1/3 per year, short-term contracts, and that there were no specific programs, steps, or actions taken for the procurement of long-term contracts to allow the plants to operate at a higher capacity factor. The AEP plants ran out of coal, and according to CTC, again, that's their report, that the companies waited until the fall of 2021 when supplies were basically unavailable to try to renegotiate their contracts. The head of coal procurement for American Electric Power Service Corporation testified at the PSC that he was never advised of the expectation that they secure coal to meet the 69% capacity factor. And CTC found as a result of the purchasing processes and decisions that there was insufficient coal available to run the plants. Just to put it a little more spin on it, long-term contracts could have avoided this issue. They could have had the coal and they could have operated at a 69% capacity factor if the coal was procured appropriately. I'm going to skip just another comment. You can see it in your thing. I want to really go to the commission order. And again, it's not about achieving a 69% capacity factor. It's about attempting, taking reasonable steps to achieve that. AEP personnel advised CTC that it was a goal, not a requirement. Again, that's correct and it's not correct. It is not a requirement. It doesn't have that level of enforcement, but it has more meat on it than a goal. It is an expectation. CTC did not see any bidding processes that were changed, enhanced, modified to assist these plants during this period to achieve higher capacity, and there were no specific attempts made to lower the cost of the plants to make them more competitive. This is a very important point. CTC found that, in fact, not only did AEP or APCO and Willing Power not have coal in place, that they actually put adders in their bids to make the prices higher so that they would not be chosen for dispatch, so they didn't have to operate and then run out of the remaining coal that they did have on ground. CTC's conclusions that the company did not actively pursue attempts to get their coal plants dispatched at a higher capacity, and that the companies rely on PJM as the ultimate supplier of generation. Again, give AEP the opportunity to respond to this, and I'm sure there are bases for that. Ultimately, at the end of it, their conclusions of CTC is that AEP had an obligation to engage in economic dispatch. When the plants were economical to run, they were supposed to dispatch them for the benefit of the customers. And they failed to do so, which was a violation to its customers. Important issue that raised the concern of the Office of Energy, and hence the reason why we brought this issue to the authority, is the PSC advised that they were concerned that failure to self-generate may be the result of an AEP decarbonization policy. Didn't say it was, it said there was concern, and that their advice or recommendation was that any decarbonization policy had to be subservient to their obligation to provide economical power to their customers. So that's something that we looked into. AEP's climate goals has adopted the Paris Climate Agreement goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2045. Former chairman, CEO of AEP, Nicholas Atkins, you can see his quote here that they were trying to reduce the coal-fired generating capacity by 74% from 2010 levels. This is significant progress. According to the previous administration, it is progress to reduce the amount of coal-fired generation at AEP in furtherance of the decarbonization policy. According to the corporate documents of AEP, they also have an incentive program, decarbonization plan. It was adopted to increase the percentage of generation from renewables instead of fossil fuels, and there is a incentive that was paid to the representatives according to their annual statement. Those are the amounts that were payable. I'm not saying they were paid, but they were payable to the executives and the board for meeting decarbonization goals. Clarification here. In 2023, the annual statement, proxy statement, says that this incentive is based on the percentage of renewable generation to carbon generation. Under that analysis, if you close a coal plant, the percentage of renewable generation increases, and by logic, it would entitle them to the incentive payment. The 2024 document states the incentive is paid for each new megawatt of renewable generation. So as it currently stands, the incentive is paid only for renewable generation, new megawatts. So the closure of a coal plant today will justify the payment of the incentive, but under the old language in the 2023 document, it's conceivable that it would. Not saying it has been, but it is possible that that could happen. Additional concern is in the documents. AEP has a fast transition scenario that it is going to close all of its coal plants 5 years earlier than book life, which means that they would all be closed by 2040, and the resulting West Virginia plants would close by 2035. Under this fast transition scenario, they understand that under the business as usual scenario, as coal plants close, their demand for electricity within their region will also decline. So as the coal mines close, they're not going to use as much electricity, which means they're not going to have as much demand or generation. The AEP's climate impact analysis. Direct impacts include reductions in the labor force and associated wages, disposable income, and other economic activity as these industries reduce operations or shut down completely. It shows, I think, the gravity of the situation and what's at stake here. And then lastly, the basis for the fast transition scenario is that it recognizes The strategy to close their plants may cause coal mining operations to shut down. The strategy, quote, also represents a significant opportunity to reduce carbon emissions, provide stable energy costs, and grow corporate earnings. CTC's conclusions. Competitive coal supply to these plants is a critical ingredient for dispatching to PJM. Without competitive coal supply, these plants will not be dispatched by PJM and will not run. And the company should have considered long-term contracts with the knowledge that the coal plants were proposed to run until 2040. The companies have placed an over-reliance on the PJM market and nearly got out of the habit of utilizing their own plants for their generation. The ratepayers are paying rates for plants which are not being dispatched to their full abilities due to the poor sense and judgment of the companies. And ultimately, they conclude by saying that AEP benefits from the upgrades to the plants, but the ratepayers don't benefit because the plants aren't being operated prudently. So I stated earlier, those are CTC and the PSC's conclusions. A couple of issues that I would like to raise from the perspective of the West Virginia Office of Energy. I think the first step is determining what's the actual issue. What is the true issue here? And it's just as important in determining what is the issue as determining what is not the issue. So I'm going to try to identify and narrow the issue for the authority as clearly and as precisely as I can. And I believe the question is, why did AEP lack sufficient coal supplies during the recovery period to run its coal plants when it was not only economical to do so, but when PJM prices were at historical highs, causing the company to incur $553 million in under recovery instead of securing $231 in relief to the customers? That's the issue. It's limited in scope, it's limited in duration. And any information outside that scope, outside that duration, quite frankly, I don't think is relevant or helpful to the analysis. So let's take a couple issues off the table. Duration. Again, this duration is from March 21 to February of 23. Analyzing historical capacity factors from 5, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, why it may be informative is not necessarily relevant to this issue. The only period of concern is March 21 to February 23. I think I've touched on it before. It's also not about the capacity factor. This is not a policy issue, and it's not about the PSC's expectation they have a 69% capacity factor. It's not a requirement, it's not a goal, it's an expectation. Importantly, it's not about economic dispatch. We hear a lot of comments that coal is uneconomical. Ironically, this case is the result of the fact that it was very economical at times. There is no question it was highly economical for AEP to self-generate during this period of time. They would have made hundreds of millions. There's no question that they failed to self-generate at a 69% capacity factor during this time when it was economical to do so. So it follows then that there is no question that AEP did not follow the rules of economic dispatch during this time period. It simply did not happen. The question is why? Lastly, what it's not about the upgrades to the plants. It's not about the EPA regulations and the upgrades they made. That's informative, but it's not definitive. It signals that they may intend to keep the plants open, but not necessarily. 2 points. The upgrades to make these plants, they make the plants more valuable. So there's a justification for doing it in and of itself. And the upgrades are funded by the ratepayers. And this is a question I think the authority may want to delve into. I don't have the expertise to understand. But if the plants are upgraded and closed early, if they're more valuable, what's the result of depreciation? And what's the benefit to the company if these plants are upgraded and closed before their end of life in 2040? So now that we know what the issue is and we know what the causes are not, what are the causes? I think we can limit it to 4 easy points. Was it the decarbonization plan? I think it's important to say, we're not saying it is. We can't say it's not. The very important point, though, is that any corporate decarbonization plan of a regulated utility in West Virginia that has coal plants is fundamentally at odds with its obligation to provide reliable power to its customers. AEP may have a strong desire to decarbonize, but it has a legal obligation to provide economically run its plants. And to the extent that decarbonization plan runs afoul of that obligation, the obligation to AEP's customers must always prevail. So I think the best way to take this issue off the table is to determine if, in fact, a decarbonization incentive was paid in 2022, 2023, and if so, what was the calculation? What was the basis for that payment? Was it because of decreased capacity? If it's not, it's easy to determine, and we can take this issue off the table very easily. So that leaves 4 options. Why did AEP run out of coal during this period? Was it a decarbonization policy? Was it AEP's failure to secure sufficient coal reserves when they should have? Was it the coal company's failure to supply coal under contract that AEP went out and secured, thus making it not AEP's fault, but the supplier's contract for not honoring those contracts? Or were there other factors affecting the market at whole beyond AEP's control that affected everyone operating coal plants? My suggestion is that we narrow the analysis down to that question and those 4 analyses to determine which one of those 4 it was. And the reason I suggest that we do this, it's not to punish AEP, it's not to embarrass anybody, it's not to cast blame. The sole purpose of this is to determine and to make sure that this doesn't happen again. That's why we have to answer these questions. We have to determine if it's an issue of coal supply, how do we fix it so that this doesn't happen again. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the presentation and my comments. Open to questions, or if you'd like to wait till AEP, however you like to handle it.
I think go ahead and field any questions now for Director Preservati and board members. Yeah, Secretary Ward.
I apologize, Nick, thank you so much for the presentation. What was the fourth goal that you thought needed to be answered? I only thought the first 3.
The 4th was whether there are outside influences that affected the market as a whole. For example, like the Ukraine war, other issues that made coal supplies difficult for all entities, not just AEP, but all utilities operating coal plants to secure coal. It may be very well maybe an issue like that.
Good, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? I have 2 for you, Nick. You talked a lot early on about, it kept coming up, the capacity factor, and it may be beneficial if you just explain generally when we say capacity factor, generating capacity factor, what we're talking about.
What that is, sir. So I came up with this analogy, and I hope the AEP folks don't laugh at me. I think hopefully it's technical enough. Imagine your car, and you look at the speedometer, and it says it can go 140 miles an hour. That's the nameplate capacity of a power plant. It can generate 1,000 megawatts, but you don't average 140 miles in your car because of traffic, because of road conditions, weather, safety. You operate at 55 miles per hour. It's the same for power plants. They can't operate at maximum capacity all the time. So the capacity factor is what, of their full capacity, what capacity are they operating at consistently? So when we say capacity, 70% capacity factor, if they can maximum 1,000 megawatts, they're producing 700 megawatts based upon the calculation. So it's what's their average that they are operating at, not the maximum that they could operate at.
Then there was a point in the presentation where you stated that the PSC consultant asserted that the companies that had put in adders to their PJM bids, essentially to help ensure that their bids wouldn't be accepted. What would an adder be?
The report didn't detail that, and I'm not 100% sure what types of adders could be placed on that. I think that AEP would probably be better able to answer that. And I will say that, again, PSC's findings and CTC's findings are at the Supreme Court, just making that for the authorities so that there's still going to be determination of these issues, but the adder question, I don't know what the specific adders could be outside of what's typically provided.
Okay, thank you. And last call for questions for Mr.
Jason,
President.
may I ask just one?
Yeah.
Please. The 69% factor expectation, was the expectation sort of clearly delineated to to the companies? Is that a national average? Is it a national expectation that most power plants would factor at that?
I will say, from my knowledge, there are varying capacity factors that EIA, different entities, in the coal capacity factors vary depending on who you ask from. Some may be at 70, some may be at 63. I don't know how the 69% capacity factor was specifically determined in this case. I do know that it was, the notice was given, and I think it was clearly articulated to the companies, and there was some back and forth about, is this a requirement, is it an expectation, et cetera, and I believe that issue's been resolved. I think it was clearly delineated.
I think what he was asking, was it delineated by, or you say it was delineated by a notice provided by the PSC, and was it provided by the PSC in, like, you know, this particular case, or is it something like a standing order?
I believe it's a standing order. It's my understanding that they expect, if they expect AEP to run at that capacity factor, they expect all utilities to run at that capacity factor, because that's what's expected for coal plants in general. The Energy Information Administration for the federal government has capacity factors listed for every type of generation, and for coal plants, gas plants, wind, solar. So I would say, not definitively, but it's my inclination that it's an industry-wide capacity factor that's expected to be met or could be met by coal plants.
Okay.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much, Director.
Thank you.
This time we'll hear a response from a representative from Appalachian Power. Please introduce yourself, name, position, title, all that.
Okay. I'm John Scalzo. I'm the VP of Regulatory and Finance for Appalachian Power. I'd like to thank the authority for inviting me here today. We put a brief PowerPoint together in an attempt to try to address maybe some of these issues that you brought up, maybe the questions you brought up. I also have, if you want to ask about any questions about the CPC report, where, like I said, it's under litigation, so try to steer clear of that a little bit. I thought we would start off if you go to the first slide, just to give some statistics of where we're at today. Oh, do I do this? Sorry.
But to the right.
Okay. There we go. I didn't say sorry. Okay, just wanted to give a few little plant statistics as we sit here today. You know, those are our 3 power plants in question. So you got Amos, Mountaineer, and Mitchell. We have the number of days of fuel burn, coal on the ground at our various plants. Target is 35 days. You'll see that some of the plants have 2 types of coal sources. They basically blend low and high sulfur coal together to run the plant. It's to meet the EPA guidelines. Our scrubbers can only handle a certain amount of sulfur, and so you have to mix the 2 together so that the scrubbers on those plants can operate effectively. Mountaineer can handle just running an all high sulfur coal. It has a different type of scrubber technology. Talked about CCR and ELG. We made those investments to keep these plants environmentally compliant through 2040. It's $364 million. Just wanted to give an idea. We're over the next 5 years, from 25 to 29, we're making those investments in those power plants. That's roughly $636 million of additional investments to, you know, address aging equipment and different things. And the next slide, I wanted to talk about, it was brought up that we have long-term contracts, and we have a mix of both. We have a mix of, and this is a summary of our contracts that were in effect for 2023. This was publicly available information, so basically, if you look at ATCO, we have 20 long-term contracts, and their range of dates that they apply to were 21 through 28. And so if you're in 2023, it's a contract. That's just saying we have 20 contracts. They're effective right now, but we're long-term in nature. We also have 3 short-term agreements. For Webco, we have 10 long-term agreements and 5 short-term agreements. The companies have more than 30 days of coal under contract at any given time. Going to the next slide. Just wanted talk about, I think there's, we've talked about in various filings and investor decks and everything that we're going to be running these coal plants for 2040. And there's a list of the varying filings we made with the various commissions, West Virginia, Virginia. So Amos and Mountaineer, they're, APCO is a multi-jurisdictional utility, so our costs apply to both sides of the road. Generally, the cost responsibility for our power plants, 60% for Appalachian Power, the cost of those power plants is borne by Virginia and FERC customers, the other 40% is by West Virginia. We asked for approval to do CCR and ELG work in West Virginia. The Commission approved it. We asked for the same thing in Virginia. In the beginning, they only agreed to do the CCR work. We came back to West Virginia. They agreed to cover it all. We went back to Virginia, got the ELG approved. I want to try to, multiple cases, multiple things. We've highlighted that these plants are going to run to 2040 under the current environmental rules that are in place. Except maybe we're still violating new ones. You get it close, Nick. So I wanted to talk about two things here, maybe equivalent availability factor. That's how much your plant's available in a year. So you got to remember, so just like a car, you have preventative maintenance, which is like a planned outage. So we have three types of outages. You have a forced outage, that's it's running and it breaks. You have a planned outage, that's something you're planning for. It's probably long-term in duration. Sometimes you plan that years in advance. Something like the CCR ELG work would be planned maintenance. And then you've got just general maintenance. And general maintenance is, hey, this seems like an opportune time to go fix some things that are a liability, take the unit down and fix it. So what we did, we looked at the EAF. So that's, and the EAF for coal plants in PJM was 71.6%. And so those units are available, looking at the PJM coal fleet, around 72% of the time. And the other times they're down for maintenance. And so when you talk about the capacity factors, how often, kind of like you said, but it's when it's not in maintenance, how far is it, what level is it running at? And we just wanted to put, if you have an EAF of 71.6%, the hours the plant's not in down for maintenance or whatever, you would need to run at a 96.3% capacity factor to get to a 69% capacity factor for the year. So when it's available, you have to run at 96% of the time to get there. It's just math. And a lot of the outages maybe that you've seen, in the past couple of years, some of them were for CCR ELG. But in that report where you're referencing that we had low usage of the plants in those months, those were all planned outages. So they were down for planned outages. We talk about the principle of economic dispatch, and the way to boil that down is just trying to provide the lowest reasonable cost of energy to our customers. That can be self-generation, that could be the markets. We try to balance both and deliver to our customer whatever is the cheapest one we can. And so sometimes that's self-generation, and sometimes it's the market. And in general, we buy from the market all the time, regardless, because at least in the winter, we can't meet all our customer needs with our own internal generation. On the next slide, so what we're trying to lead up to, I think we talked a lot about, hey, we have decarbonization goals, and you talked about there was executive compensation was tied. But these plants, we've expressed in numerous filings, and on the first page, if you take the two items added together, we're spending nearly $1 billion keeping them operating. If there was any goal to close them, why would we have spent, why would we be putting $1 billion into those plants if they were going to close, or we had any intention of closing them in the near term? The answer is no. On supply constraints, the supply constraints, really the supply constraints happened, in the second half of 2021, more towards like August timeframe, all the way through 2022. There were a lot of key factors on why our units or coal was or was not available. You had the Ukraine war, when that happened, the price of natural gas shot through the roof, so did coal. There was a lot of exports. You could export coal for high dollar figures overseas. Coal generation during we had CCR and ELG outages. A lot of other companies, when we're talking about fuel deferrals, they had large fuel deferrals because, similar to us, they struggled to get coal to meet the needs of our customers. And one of the big ones for us was during the time we needed, when these plants were needed the most, we got shorted 3.8 million tons of coal from our suppliers. On the next slide, I always like to compare to our peers. How did we operate in comparison to our peers in PJM? So looking at this chart, that line is the average capacity factor for all the coal-fired generation in PJM. And you can see that in 19, 20, 21, we were running around about or more than all of the average of the PJM coal fleet. We procure coal to meet that kind of level. So when we're procuring coal all the way up to that point in time, we're procuring it to run around a 40% capacity factor or historical norms. Over the last 10 years, PJM coal fleet ran at around a 42% capacity factor. So that's how our planning, our forecasting is based off of all that. When you look at 2022 and you see that we're below the average for PJM, if we would have had the 3.8 million tons of coal, we could operate it at around a 50% capacity factor. When the commission's order came out, around the 69%, that was right at the end of August when this was all happening. And the coal markets, it's well known, got rather constrained. It was hard to get coal. If you look at the capacity factor line item on the average for the PJM coal fleet, it went down in 2022 when coal plants could have been dispatched. The actual availability or how much they actually dispatched went down. Because similar to us, there wasn't coal available to run at a higher capacity factor. And so when you're talking about all those margins that we missed, everyone missed them. Because either the coal wasn't there to procure. When you're talking about that comment about Jeff Dow, we've reiterated a number of times. When this was going on in September of 2021, Jeff Dow wasn't instructed to go procure coal at 69%. He was given an order to go purchase. Normally when we do an RFP, we would set quantities and limits, what we're looking for. We said, send out an open-ended RFP, get whatever you can get. Looking on a going forward basis, what we did here was over the last 18 months, and it seems like the 69% capacity factor may be less of an issue, but let's try to walk through it anyhow. When you look at the bar chart, that's the cost of our dispatch just related to fuel in comparison to PJM power prices. So you can see over that time period, the price of our dispatch and the average price of PJM, our dispatch costs were higher. And so if we would have ran at a 69% capacity factor during that time period, it would have cost $240 million of additional dollars that we'd have had to recover from customers. So factors limiting coal-fired dispatch, we just said the things that for us that were limiting coal-fired dispatch was the availability of coal, the price of coal, and the competing price of natural gas. The PJM market is made up of a lot of natural gas, and so when natural gas prices are low, they get dispatched first. They take up a large part of the market. So if you looked at 2023 natural gas, so the amount of energy that was consumed in PJM, 44% of that was generated by natural gas. A third, 33% was nuclear, and then coal was like 15%. And the others were, renewables and other stuff. Things not limiting dispatch, corporate decarbonization goals, or executive compensation goals. I can't highlight enough that we would never, ever let any of that, whatever it is, impact what we do for customers. We're always trying to do what's best for customers, the least reasonable cost for customers. If we were to do that, we'd be having this very argument here of, you shouldn't be doing it. We know, and so we don't. And so, like we said here, AEP nor the company has ever had a decarbonization policy that has affected the dispatch of these plants in any way, nor has executive compensation. I think we talked about this, if you want to run it at set capacity factor, there's a cost associated with that. We're a multi-jurisdictional utility. We can't recover those costs from the folks that share the plants with us. So, like I said, Amos and Mountaineer are shared with Virginia. Mitchell is shared with Kentucky. We can't pass on those costs, so we would have to recover them here. If we were, if we would have ran it, the 69% capacity factor for the last 18 months was, like I said, $240 million. That would have raised the residential bill $15, and the impact on one of our largest industrial customers would have been $3 million. And then coal versus natural gas. The other thing I'd like to highlight here is, as we sit here today, natural gas, the $2 gas, is more economical than coal. And at today's market prices, on an MMBTU basis, coal price, the fuel to run our power plants would need to be 40 to 50% cheaper to kind of balance out that equation. But I also like to highlight that changes all the time. It's not that one's better than the other. It's just at certain times things are more economic or not. That's why you don't want to have some set capacity factor or whatever. You want to rely a little bit. Our current policy where we run an economic dispatch, we rely on our coal generation units, and when they're more expensive, we rely on the market. There was a dislocation in the market that caused a great upheaval in commodity prices, which led to high energy prices. And unfortunately, when coal was needed, and it wasn't like that. I think part of the issue is the mines can't produce more. They can't just all of a sudden produce more when the market just shoots up. So the market shot up and said, okay, these plants could run more for an 18-month period. Well, I can't call them and say, hey, I need you to give me millions of tons more of coal because it's now economical. I went out to the Coal Association. I met with vendors. We tried everything we could to get competitively priced coal during that time frame so we could run the units more if it was economical. And we were able to do that to some degree, but not enough to offset everything that was going on. And I will leave some time for questions.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Scalzo. I'll open up the questions from members before I go myself. And members of the authority have questions for Mr. Scalzo?
Sir, I have a question. Thank you
Mr.
very much for the presentation, very informative. Regarding the contracts, one of your slides referenced the long-term agreements versus short-term agreements. Could you tell us or elaborate a little on what constitutes a long-term agreement versus a short-term agreement? And, do those contracts have renewal provisions contained therein?
I don't know if they have renewable provisions, I don't do that, but I think generally we kind of classify short term as like a year, and then long term greater than a year. And so there's varying degrees, so we have some that run a couple of years, couple run 3 years, 5 years, and longer.
Okay, so 3 to 5 years, and some longer would be a long-term?
Yeah, probably between 2 and 5,
Okay. And short-term?
like 12 months or less.
12 months, less than 1 year.
Those are probably trying to fill a spot need. But I'm not the co-procurer, I'm just,
Right. I have another question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, just keep going.
The, has AEP sought a must-run designation from PJM for the coal-fired plants? Do you know if that's?
I don't know for sure, I can find that out for you, I don't know where, I know in the past, this year we've been running them, and putting, we talked about adders. Well, this year we've been putting on, where we have to decrement so the units run, so we don't run past our coal pile limitations. And so they kind of go both ways. I don't know if we've got to the must run, but I can get you that answer. Just not my area of expertise.
Another question I have is, what does net plant coal-fired generation, what does that mean?
I'm going to reference it because I looked at I saw, if you're referencing the number you had in the report.
Yeah.
I looked that up. So what that was representing was, I think in 2028, it said our plant investments, all our plant investments, transmission, distribution, and generation, that coal-fired units would represent about 5% of that total balance.
Okay, perfect.
And of course, the units are still running. It's not that they're closing, it's just as time goes on and they depreciate, their value goes down, and we're making significant investments as time goes on in our system.
Right. One final question, John, I appreciate your responses. There's been mention of a fast transition scenario, whereas, the plants would be, the coal-fired facilities would actually be decommissioned prior to the expected life of 2040. Is that something that AEP's adopted, or is that something?
No. And if you looked at that document, it's not. It was that, if you looked at the front of the document, there was a thing that said, hey, it's imperative that this not be construed as a directive or something we're doing. It was merely a study to say, what happens if we have to transition faster? And so what impacts does it have on our communities? What impacts does it have on our customers? What impact does it have on us as a utility? Because if we were to close those plants down sooner, we would have had to make tens of billions of dollars worth of investments to replace them. So it's merely there to show what happens under that scenario. And so we can plan if that scenario actually came to pass. Not something we're asking for, just saying if something external to us would have shortened their lives, what do we need to really be thinking about? And not leaving our communities behind in the process.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else? Secretary Ward?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of questions come to mind here. Looking through, you had about a 17% decline in PJM generation from coal-fired units across the board. But as we get into the September, December timeframe of 2021 when it hit, we saw reductions from 49% to 6% at Mitchell, at Amos 59 to 3%, and at Mountaineer 29 to nothing. And I think you referred to it, this was scheduled maintenance activities had to be done.
Probably a little bit of both. So there was definitely those plants were down for outages. And at a certain point, as that year went on and we weren't getting our coal deliveries, part of what we had to do when we have a finite amount of coal supply is to make sure we had that finite amount of coal supply what was most advantageous. The most advantageous time to burn or utilize that coal was in the winter, because wood prices spike in the winter. And so it's a little bit of both. Mainly, predominantly, they were all unplanned outages, but we might have also been just trying to conserve a little bit of coal as we were going into the winter months.
But as just as a follow-up, wouldn't you also agree that, you know, a maintenance plan that takes 3 facilities offline at the same time in one state is probably not a very forward-thinking decision?
I'm sure there were reasons why we had to do it. I'm not
Again, as a follow-up, you talk about the procurement and the inability to obtain supply. What has AEP done, or what do they plan to do over the last year, since this has been pretty much the topic of concern, to ensure that it does not run out of coal, to at least maximize the distribution from coal-fired generation when it's economical to do so? So have you changed your procurement processes in any way?
So we have done some things, as this was going on, we tried to do some contracting to help bring a couple new mines into business by giving them a decent contract that helped them get into business. We've done that. We've looked at, so to be quite honest with you, we were able to procure some coal, and now what's really going on is we're trying to figure out, right now, the coal we have and the coal we have under contract, how do we push it out? Because market prices and energy prices are low. If I run the units, that's going to cost the customers more money. Can I actually work, and the coal supplier's been working with us to try to move coal supply from one year to the next. Because right now, coal generation in PJM is, natural gas is cheap and it's displacing it. But and as we're coming out of that, we're going to be looking at how do we contract going forward. The problem is you can't really just sit there and say, I'm going to buy a whole bunch of coal or natural gas, whatever the commodity is, to meet something you don't know is going to happen. So when we do long-range planning, we plan on what we expect to happen based on the history of what's happened. And this will be one of the things we take into consideration is, what do we have to do? I think some of the things we've done is say, okay, if this happens again, our target levels of coal inventory, I referenced were like 35 days. In the past, they might have been 25 days. So maybe we need to keep a little more coal on the ground to ride through the blips. But it's hard to plan around a massive dislocation in the market that's happened once in the last 10 years. So if you plan for that, that's very expensive too. So it's a balance. So we're still working at it, trying to figure out what's the perfect balance.
With your facilities here in West Virginia, should you choose to upgrade a little bit, I think the stockpile room that you have should accommodate an increase above the 35-day supply. Should it be economical to do so?
Right.
I know there's other costs associated.
Right, there's other costs. So the big cost of that is carrying costs. And if you get the coal piles too big, it costs more money to manipulate them, move them around.
Understood. Leads me to another question. The expectation of 69% capacity factor being achieved, and respectfully, I'll argue with that because it's pretty clear that you do have downtime and stuff. But is it even feasible? Have you done has Appalachian done the upgrades that are necessary and the routine maintenance necessary is it feasibly possible to achieve a 69% capacity factor at your facilities here in West Virginia?
I think that's a two-part question. So I'll go the first part. So we might need to spend more money on a little bit more upfront maintenance, and so we can, over a short amount of times, or take greater risks around outages, because one of the things you need to do is not, so you saw almost 30% of the time a coal-fired power plant, at least the ones in PJM, are down for some type of maintenance. So you really got to shorten that time period. And so if you shorten that time period, the units are designed to run, and ideally a coal-fired power plant is designed to turn it on and it just runs until you shut it off and take it down for maintenance. the biggest driver of whether you run at a 69% capacity factor or any capacity factor is the price of coal versus natural gas and the price of energy in the market.
But should all those factors come into play for the mixture, your facilities do or do not? Are they in a condition that they could maximize, should the market indicate that
So
being
I'll give
necessary?
you an example. I don't know if they can do it all the time, but so in the summer of 2021, a lot of the months during that time period, those units ran at a capacity factor of in 80%.
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple more, and I'll try to be brief, looking back at my notes. I want to go back a little bit to the other question about your contracts. It would be interesting to know if these are long-term contracts with, outage clauses that have to be renewed on an annual basis, or if they accrue committed contracts for 3 to 5 years, or whatever term your long-term contracts go under. That would be one question. Is there a solid commitment, or is there an out clause on an annual basis, should you all choose to exercise that? I'd be interested in knowing that.
I don't know for sure. I believe they're fixed terms, but
Okay.
there might be something.
I believe everything else that I had here that I've made, that I was concerned about, I believe you've addressed. But again, thank you for your time answering questions. We do
Thanks
appreciate
for
it.
having me.
Mr. Byrd?
Thank you, Mr. Silver. First of all, thanks for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
During your presentation, you were talking about the shortfalls in coal deliveries. And I made a note that I believe you said it was in that August time frame. All of a sudden you find yourself in a situation, maybe not just you find yourself in a situation where you can't acquire coal. Is that a contractual issue that could be dealt with in advance so that those stockpiles are in place prior to this magical early fall time frame?
I think the issue there is so like us, when I showed you the capacity factors going to material change, is and I don't know this for sure, but could the industry even respond? If we needed more, did they have the capacity? It felt like us that the industry, didn't really have the capacity to respond. That they, all that they had was sold, and historically, the road has run at around a 40% capacity factor, and that's what they were able to deliver. Because if you look, the whole rest of the PJM, that's just an assumption on our part, but
Okay.
contractually, I don't think you try contractually get yourself out of it if they don't have it. Or if we could contract at a price that was advantageous, you might be able to do something. The problem is these are commodities and they move around, so maybe the price I would need today for coal to bring more of it on would be at a price that's below their cost of operations, or not, or, and that's not fair. I can't expect that of someone, so.
Okay. Sir, do you know, kind of based on a 69% capacity factor number that we're working with, how many days coal supply you have under contract for your 3 plants?
So,
Under contract?
so many days.
Well, you have an obligation to have so many days. Do
Yeah.
you know
Trying
how?
to think, so the last thing I saw, so if we ran at a 69% capacity factor, I think we referenced you needed like 15 million tons of coal under contract. I think right now we're around probably in the 7 to 8 million and that's around a 35-40. We're still kind of around the 35-40% range. And that's because we've been moving stuff around. We had a higher concentration of coal in 2024, and our suppliers have been working with us to move that out.
Okay, thank you. Kind of on that same vein, at those same 3 plants, do you know maybe how much you have under contract for those plants? Not let me restate that, not under contract, but on the ground, in place. Do you know? what
So
that is?
if you go to page, on my deck, page 1,
Okay,
so those are the number of days of coal we have on the ground, in 2 different types at each plant.
okay, my apologies. How do you sort of have you ever thought about indexing a coal to the PJM price of power? Does that ever happen?
So, we have not. The commission's asked us to, kind of in their task force, to look at it, and it's something we're open to, and we're gonna start looking at it. I know, another power plant has something similar. The major difference for that versus our plants is it's a mine-mouth plant, one operator, kind of feeds it, and so that's a little easier to administer, where we might have numerous folks, and we would need numerous folks to agree to that. So, but we're looking into it, to see if it's something that's feasible, or how it might work. And then also, our coal suppliers interested in that type of contracting methodology.
Thank you very much.
Ward?
Got a question following up on the coal capacity factor. Do you keep track of that on a monthly basis?
Yes.
And if so, for 2024, what does that look like for each one of the plants on a monthly basis, then averaging? You know?
I don't have that offhand. We can get that to you. It's actually something we report to the Public Service Commission on a monthly basis. And so it's docketed in there, and we can get you that information.
Okay. So if we look at the past year, has AEP...
One second, I just want to make sure I'm not lying to you. We go on page, on a monthly basis, but I'm just trying to see. No, we just have through 24. I'm sorry.
Okay, nothing for 24. So again, if we look at the past year, has AEP modified its bidding process into PJM or attempted to lower its cost of generation to get those 3 coal plants dispatched with a higher capacity factor?
So like I said, we've put, at times we've put decrements on our offers to get the plants to run, largely related to, trying to maintain our coal piles underneath the coal pile limits that we have. In the winter, in summer here, plants are running a little bit better, and so I think we've pulled down some of those inventory balances a little bit. When you talk about improving the plant operations, those would be like capital investments and things like that. And we're doing that all the time. We look at things to improve heat rates and things like that. I'm not the person to really kind of talk about that, but like I said, we're spending, on the first page here, we're spending over $636 million on the plants. A lot of times that's work to either address aging infrastructure or try to find ways to improve heat rates on our plants, which is a major efficiency.
Okay, earlier Director Preservati stated that there were adders included. Is that true, that there were adders included to the PJM bidding process to assure that the plants were not dispatched?
So what we did, I think I talked about this before, is when we were under a constrained coal situation. So you have to say, I have a certain amount of coal that I have under contract that's being reliably delivered to me. When's the best time to utilize that coal? In that instance, when I'm constrained, it's the winter and the summer. So we put adders on at times to build up our coal inventory so we could ride through the most expensive periods for PJM power prices.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. I have several questions. I think it's probably worth mentioning for everybody's context. Most of my questions revolve around the response that you all provided. We provided them with the Office of Energy's report ahead of time, and then they provided us with the response that they were going to give today. So, some of the things I'm going to ask about are things that we have currently talked about most of it are, but you mentioned in the presentation, even just now in one of your answers to the question, you're referring to the amount of money, 600+ million being invested into the plants, and even referred to that being an indicator that you wouldn't have no intention of shutting them down. But I want to make clear, these investments being made, are those not largely recovered from ratepayers through the PSC rate setting process?
Yes, they are, but like I said, we would not make large investments in power plants and saddle our customer with higher rates if we didn't have the intention of running power plants.
You provided in the response that if you operated the plants at 69% during the entire time period in question, it would cost an additional $240.4 million. Would it be possible for you to do an analysis of how much it would cost, positive or negative, if you had ran at that capacity during the September to November range in 2021 when those PJM prices were, $90 a kilowatt hour?
So, question on, so that, you have to make assumptions. So I would have to assume, I don't have the coal, so if I got coal, I have to put an assumption with that.
I don't expect you to have that answer right now.
No,
I'm
not right
asking-
now, but I'm just saying, when you put it together, there was no coal to be had.
Yeah,
And so if there's no coal to be had, I couldn't run more. This is my point.
yeah, it's a theoretical question that I'm
Okay.
requesting an answer for later on. If you had the coal supply, if you had obtained the coal supply during that time period with those prices. Because I think makes it, I think that makes it a more fair analysis even to AEP to say, well, here's what it would have cost across the board, here's what it would have cost during these time periods. You could even provide during the more standard time period. I just, looking at it from apples to apples, looking at it across the entire period isn't exactly informative when we're looking at it, during those huge spikes.
We'll put something together and enumerate the assumptions we made to do it.
Do you know, this is another probably a math question that I understand if you don't have off the top of your head, but when those PJM prices are as high as $60 to $90 a kilowatt hour, let's just say the $90 a kilowatt hour, what price of coal, what's the maximum price of coal does it become, is it feasible to operate the plants?
I can provide, we can provide
Yeah.
that to you. I have a general idea, but probably, my recollection is probably a little foggy.
Now, your response and even presentation claim that the companies, Appalachian Power and Wheeling Power, don't have a decarbonization policy governing the coal plants, but
Affecting their operation.
affecting their operation. But what we have seen from American Electric Power was a decarbonization policy. Do those policies not govern, does that controlling parent companies' policies govern the operation of the subsidiaries? Would those policies not have been applicable to the companies?
Like we said, they did not affect the operation of our power plants. At that time, today, or in the future.
But generally, does American Electric Power's corporate policies impact the operation of Appalachian Power and Wheeling Power? If they adopt a policy that, we're only gonna generate, Monday through Thursday, would that not be passed on to the subsidiaries?
It would have to make sense, so I think the way to.
It's an absurd example,
Yeah.
I'm just pulling it out.
I think the way to maybe better link cost causation. So you also got to remember, we operate in Virginia. So in Virginia, they have an RPS standard that says all their energy by 2050 will come from renewable resources. It ratchets up from now until then. We also have customers that, like a Nucor, that are seeking renewable resources. So a lot of these goals that you talk about, the management, and say, they're in response to external forces, customers that want things, or laws we need to follow.
Okay. Your response also stated on this essentially the same subject, also stated that at no time has the compensation of employees of AEP been tied to the closing of coal-fired power plants or reducing the level of generation from those plants. It also stated that the goals are all stated in terms of installed capacity additions, which I think was something the director attempted to clarify. But in 2023, if the governing document that he referenced, it wasn't to installed capacity additions, it was to the percentage of carbon-free generation capacity. Therefore, if the general capacity of a coal-fired power plant doesn't have to be closed, but if it is reduced in any amount, then correspondingly, the percentage of carbon-free generation, even if static, would increase. Am I correct in that?
Was the goal stated installed capacity?
No, in 2023, the goal was percentage of carbon-free generation capacity.
Generation capacity, if it's stated as capacity, is installed capacity. So Amos is 2,900 megawatts. You know, that's its installed capacity. And so it's the percent, the way you're representing it there, it sounds like it's overall capacity. If it's capacity, it would be, you either added additional capacity resources being renewables or something else went away. The power plant did not go away. So
Your response though in your presentation indicated that the way you truly measure capacity is taking away when the coal plants are brought offline. That then reduces the capacity. So would that not affect that measurement when you took the coal plants offline?
if it was measured in megawatt hours, yes.
Yeah.
And so, yes, but like I said, what was it impacting the dispatchability of the power plants? Was availability of coal and other resources. It wasn't we were limiting anything. We went out and tried to procure more coal as this went on, all the way through 2022. So, yes, the goal may say something, but in actuality, it had no impact on our operations. Never has, never will.
Were the executive incentive bonuses that the director outlined, were they paid in 2023?
Yes, there's some level of bonus was paid. I don't know how much, for that category. I don't have the pieces of parts, but yes. The executives got some level of incentive compensation.
But based off they received compensation based off the.
Many factors, there's more than just.
Well, this was a very specific
Yeah.
incentive clause
Right.
where they.
I'm just saying, I don't know how much.
But where they paid the specific incentive that the director referenced, the incentive for reduction or increasing percentage of carbon-free generation inversely would have been reducing the percentage of coal-fired generation, where they paid that specific incentive.
I do believe that.
Secretary Ward got to this issue, pretty much got the answer, but I had it here in my notes. I think it's worth bringing back up. You provided in your response the data in the table showing the aggregate PJM coal-fired power plant capacity, that it decreased from 2021 to 2022, and correspondingly the companies decreased. Secretary Ward pointed out one thing that I'd caught, that that PJM aggregate decrease was 2%, while the aggregate decrease of the companies was 17%. So, and I know your response to him was that we had, we shut down for maintenance and whatever else may be. We shut down the facilities, which caused us to be out of step with the others. But would those other plants not have also had maintenance and the same issues? They had the same coal issues. Would they not have also had the same maintenance issues? Therefore, what I'm getting at, what differentiated you know, Mountaineer, Mitchell, and John Amos from the rest of the PJM's coal fleet.
So in 2022,
Yes.
I mean, for us, like I said, if we were delivered the stuff that we had contracted for, 3.8 million tons, our number would have been roughly 50%. So we had coal contracted for, but it wasn't delivered.
So you had coal contracts that weren't delivered.
Yes,
So you ordered coal and it didn't show up.
correct.
And so then, is that the major driver then, but that differentiates the plants from the rest of the PJMs? I mean, they received their coal, is that?
I know what happened to us. I don't know what happened to
Yeah.
everyone else. I'm just saying, if our shortfall was delivered, you know, we started building up the shortfall, you know, appreciable shortfall in the second half of 2022, big part in 2023. If that was all delivered in 2022, we'd have been around a capacity factor around 50%.
I've been to PJM headquarters, and, you know, it's like the more you learn about this process that you all go through, the more you understand that you don't understand it. So forgive me if I'm misstating this, but, you know, my understanding is, you know, and most of the data you reference in the responses, you know, the PJM day-ahead pricing. My understanding is you can bid in day-ahead pricing, but also can bid in day of when prices fluctuate. Does AEP generally bid in only in that day-ahead market, or sometimes will they bid in, say, day of in a manner that maybe you're going to bid in and lose money in the first hour or two? You know, these prices fluctuate, you know, every like 6 minutes or something, right? So, do you ever bid in, know you're going to take a loss at one point, but as the demand increases, you know, towards the end of the day, you will make money and generate, you know, revenue as a whole in the day?
Well, I'm not the commercial ops person, I'm sure we do both, but I think one of the things to remember for like a coal-fired power plant, I'm sure something similar might apply to gas, I don't know, that there's a level you can run a power plant, it's called its economic minimum. So if it's a 1,300 megawatt unit, you can run it at a much lower level. And so a lot of times what we do is during the day, you're running the plant at minimums, and then you ratchet it up for the periods of the day that have higher prices.
That's all of my questions. I do want to make one comment, and it's an issue I want to take with your response. This was in the written response, and actually my presumption is you didn't write it, so just please pass this along to whoever did. Your written response stated that the Office of Energy and the Public Energy Authority should clarify whether they wish to support the idea that companies should plan for and recover from customers the exorbitant costs to staff, build, and purchase coal and consumables to be ready for every potential worst-case scenario that could occur in contradiction of historical trends. I just want to say that is a very dramatic statement, and, you know, I take issue. First of all, the authority hasn't spoken to the issue at all. The Office of Energy only spoke through the report they provided, of which they made no policy assertions or judgments. They only cited, in fact, they provided citations for almost everything in the report, most of which were from either PSC filings or AEP's own corporate documents. So, you know, neither entity, in my opinion, has taken a stance that the company should take any sort of dramatic measures such as that. I think we all consider AEP to be generally a friend to the state, especially when it comes to our economic development efforts. So, you know, a endeavor such as, you know, today and the reports and all these communications aren't in any way, you know, to be viewed as a you know, an attack for some reason. It's purely to make sure, to do our duty to make sure that our ratepayers, that our citizens, are being treated in a way that, you know, is most economically viable to them. You know, a lot of people, their power bill can be the difference between whether they pay their medical bill or not. So it's a very important issue that we take very seriously. So that's where this all comes from. It doesn't come from, trying to assert, that you should take such dramatic measures to prevent, unprecedented issues. So,
If we misunderstood, I'm sorry for that.
yeah, well, I appreciate that. That's all I have. Does anyone else have any more questions or follow-up?
I apologize, but if permissible, I do have
Yeah.
one more question. Given the carbon reduction goals for AEP, the overall corporate goal, and your stated objective to secure the lowest pricing for the ratepayers, has AEP considered, or are they looking into, or are they actually actively seeking any grants from under the bill law or under the Inflation Reduction Act that the Department of Energy is making available for retrofitting, maintenance, transmission, transmissivity, that could actually reduce or to a great extent the amount of recovery you're seeking from the ratepayers at the current time?
So yes, so a lot of the different grant type of things that are out there from the federal government, we've applied for several of them across the gamut of different things.
Do you consider those in formulating your request for the actual, because it appears that your only request going in for the ratepayers through the Public Service Commission, state of West Virginia, cover your increased rates 100%. So why could, if you are seeking or have received grants, shouldn't those numbers be offset to some degree to save the ratepayers money?
So a lot of those things are for money we would spend prospectively. So I haven't asked for it. But what we would do is, so if a lot of these programs will be some type of federal matching. So if it's $100 project, they may fund $40. And so if they fund 40, I ask the ratepayers to cover the other 60. So yes, ratepayers do save in that environment. The federal government doesn't cover 100% of it, they cover some portion of it. And so the portion the government provides, that lowers the cost of the customers, because I'd only be receiving the piece that's not recovered from the government.
So, and many of these grants were available, were in the process at the time of this.
We
So
put out for a lot of that.
So the $552 million reflects anticipated.
So that's a complete, so the 552 is for, you had referenced was for electric costs that we've already provided customers. When you're talking about government grants are there to, so you were going to make some type of capital investment, so something to maybe improve your distribution lines. And so the federal government will come in and say, if you apply for the grant and get it, they're going to say, hey, you were going to spend $100 million on this project. We're going to give you a grant to cover, some portion of that, 40, 50, 30%, whatever it is. And so they're actually footing the bill on some future project. So it doesn't cover the cost you have now. It covers future costs you might be making to improve your system in certain ways that meet whatever specification there are for the specific grants.
Understood. I guess I'm a little confused because like the $600 million in upgrade that you referenced several times.
Yeah, so
But yet it's a $600 million upgrade that the ratepayers are expected to incur.
So I don't know, I think we might have applied, if there's something that applies to the generation space and it fits us, we would apply for it. I know we've done stuff around distribution type of work, we've done stuff, we've asked for grants around computer software, we might even partner on something on generation. I just don't, there's a lot of them we're going after, I just don't know them all.
Thank you.
I'll add in, there's actually a number of significant grants that we have staff working with them on to apply for, but that would all then be reflected if they receive the grant in the rears moving forward. Member Byrd?
With your indulgence, I apologize for coming back at you here.
I'm here all day.
Earlier when I questioned, when I asked about coal supply in that fall timeframe, if I recall right, what you said was that what you responded to Secretary Bailey was that you were unable to get deliveries because they could not deliver your coal. I I guess maybe my note says to myself that you said that you could have probably got that coal, but it would have been at a loss to the supplier of the coal, and you didn't want to do that.
So, I didn't hear you, sorry.
That you might have been able to take those deliveries, but it could have been at a loss to the supplier of the coal?
No, I was just assuming the $3.8 million, or 3.8 million tons, we were short. I think the question was, could you do something around coal contracting, maybe around indexing it for LNP prices and stuff? And we're looking into that. The question is, you know, when power prices are $15 or something, can a coal supplier deliver me coal at what $15 energy prices look like? They may not be able to. That's where I was talking about coal supplier. It may not work for them. But we're looking in, like I said, we're looking into it.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Seeing none, Mr. Skouser, I can't thank you enough for being here and fielding all these questions. You handled it very well, and it's very much appreciated.
And like I said, if you ever have questions, want to talk to us, happy to, on any topic.
Yeah, we always are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, at this time, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is separate from our previous topic, but it was just a general update from Director Preservati.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not significant things to report, but I would like to report the Office of Energy in support of the authority. We've made several new hires in the Office of Energy, so I have some of the staff here. If they would just stand. Come on. Members of the staff stand. Chelsea, our new communications manager, is also coming around the corner, so we do have new staff. So we're trying to be able to support the authority better. There you guys, thank you. So, in regards to the authority, again, we have one update on the grant that we came back to the authority several months ago on pyrolysis and the ability to get hydrogen or elements out of coal. And that grant was awarded through congressionally directed spending through NOAA. It's being administered through NEDL, National Energy Lab up in Morgantown, and we're going to be working with the West Virginia University and their engineering department to determine that grant and how it's going to be administered. But the goal is to determine additional uses of coal outside of electric generation and metallurgical purposes. So that's another thing that we are working on, and when that's developed further, we'll bring it to you for consideration. And other than that, Mr. Chairman, don't have much another update unless there are specific topics you'd like us to address.
No, unless anybody else has any other questions. Thank you very much, Director.
Thank you.
Now, any announcements? Remarks by members? And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, nay. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.